It was an ordinary morning, but something inside her told her that day would be different. She didn't know it yet, but that would be the day that would transform pain into strength, and her life would never be the same. Fate, with its harshness, had cruelly removed her husband from her life, leaving her alone in an abyss of sadness and hopelessness. Have you ever wondered what you would do if you lost someone who was your foundation? How would you cope with the emptiness that remains when the person you love suddenly passes away? For a long time, she thought she wouldn't be able to overcome the loss, that life no longer had a purpose. But the answer came slowly, like a faint light appearing in the midst of darkness. Yes, she was able to start over. And more than that, she found the strength to help other women do the same. The grief that seemed like the end was actually the beginning of a new journey. After the funeral, Clara's pain seemed endless. She spent her days in an empty routine, waking up, eating, and trying, unsuccessfully, to occupy her mind with anything that would distract her from the immense emptiness that filled her heart. The house that had once been filled with laughter, conversations, and plans with Raphael now seemed like an echo of memories that could no longer be touched. Every corner held a reminder of him: the sofa where he sat, the table where they dined together, the room where they shared dreams. All these moments became ghosts that haunted her days. Loneliness seemed a constant companion. Clara tried to move on, but she didn't know how. She found herself wondering, what now? How can I live without him? What do I do with all this pain? During endless nights, sadness crept into her thoughts. She thought she would never feel joy again. That's when the darkness grew stronger. She found herself increasingly distant from what had once given her life meaning. It was difficult to leave the house, difficult to talk to friends. Even working felt like an immense burden. How can anyone move on after losing the person they planned to grow old with? It was one of those nights when Clara thought she couldn't take it anymore. She was alone at home, the curtains closed, and the silence was suffocating. The tears wouldn't stop falling as she stared at Raphael's portrait on the bookshelf. The pain seemed stronger than anything. On impulse, she grabbed her phone and started typing a message to her best friend, Juliana, saying she didn't know what to do with her life anymore, that she didn't have the strength to go on. She typed, deleted, typed again. But the moment she hit send, something inside her hesitated. How could she ask for help if she didn't even know where to begin to get back on her feet? But in that moment, something inside Clara began to shift. She realized she was sinking into a spiral that wouldn't lead her anywhere. She didn't know exactly how, but something in her wanted to fight. Perhaps the love she still felt for Raphael was the key to finding a way to move on. The desire to honor his memory, to live a life he would have wanted for her, began to take shape. In the days that followed, Clara made a difficult but necessary decision. She sought support. She sought a therapist, but also connected with other women who were facing the same pain as her. It was then that she began to understand that she was not alone. Talking to other widows, sharing stories, feeling that each of them, in their own way, was also trying to rebuild, was a foundation for Clara. She began to realize that the pain, though immense, could be a step toward something new. She realized that by helping others, she was also helping herself. The healing process, however, didn't happen all at once. It was a daily process, made up of small victories and defeats. There were times when Clara felt she didn't have the strength to continue, but she didn't give up. As strong as the urge to isolate herself was, she knew she needed to take the next step. As she became involved in support groups, Clara began to realize how much these women, with their stories of loss and new beginnings, were giving her strength. Sometimes, a simple conversation, an understanding look, was enough to bring some peace to her soul. As she began to connect more deeply with this group of women, Clara had an idea. What if she could create a broader space to help other widows? A place where they didn't have to hide their pain, where they could talk freely about their loss, and, at the same time, find hope to start over. This thought was the turning point. Clara, with the support of the friends she had made during this journey, began planning something bigger. She created a support group for widows, where women could meet, talk, share experiences, and, most importantly, support each other. The first meetings were small, but the impact was immediate. Clara heard moving stories from women who, like her, had lost their husbands but were trying to find new meaning in their lives. Clara had no idea that her own grief would empower her so much. She found herself helping others, sharing her experiences, listening with an open heart. And this made her feel that, even after all the pain, she had something valuable to offer. The group grew quickly. From what began timidly, Clara created a space where women could not only tell their stories, but also learn from each other, laugh, cry, and, in a way, heal together. What Clara realized over time was that, although each woman had her own grief journey, they all had something in common: the need to rebuild their lives and find new ways forward. With each meeting, Clara felt more empowered. She was becoming the person she wished she had found when she was at her lowest point. She had known, somehow, what the other women needed. They weren't just words of comfort, but concrete actions, a continuous support that helped them realize that the pain, though immense, was only part of their story. Life, at some point, could be rebuilt, with new foundations, but always with the memory of those who passed away, cherished. Clara never imagined, on those nights when she thought about giving up, that her grief would one day lead her to find a greater purpose. What seemed like an end was, in fact, the beginning of something completely new, and she was no longer alone. Time, little by little, proved to be an unexpected ally for Clara. She never imagined that the pain of losing Raphael would transform into something so complex and multifaceted. In the first months after the loss, she could barely leave the house, barely look at the places they shared. But, as she allowed herself to begin again, something in her heart began to change. The pain didn't disappear, but she began to accept that recovery would be a process, and that she, even in the midst of suffering, could find a new path. The support group Clara had created grew more than she imagined. Women who, like her, were trying to find new meaning in their lives, were reaching out. The connection between them felt almost magical, a genuine support network, where the most important thing was not just comfort, but the idea that everyone could, together, move beyond the pain. These women, with their own stories of loss, showed Clara that life could begin again, that there was still room for dreams and achievements, even when it seemed everything had been lost. But the healing process wasn't limited to the group meetings. Clara began to realize that, in addition to helping other women get back on their feet, she herself was experiencing a transformation. Amid the advice she offered and the comfort she provided, she began to rebuild her own life. The pain was still there, but it no longer dominated her existence. She began to live with the longing, with the memories of Raphael, but without letting it stop her from moving forward. At one of these meetings, one of the participants, Marta, shared a story that deeply touched Clara. After losing her husband, Marta felt completely lost. She spoke of her loneliness, but also of how she began to realize the importance of taking care of herself. She had gradually allowed herself to return to old hobbies, like gardening and reading, things her husband hadn't shared with her. These little things began to bring back the sparkle in her eyes. Marta said, "It's not easy, but life has little moments of beauty, if you know how to look for them." Clara reflected on this for days. She knew that, as difficult as it was, she too would need to find her own way back to life, to the things that gave her pleasure and meaning. Working with the support group already gave her purpose, but she wanted more. She wanted, at least, to feel the pleasure of the little things again, like listening to her favorite music or going for a walk in the fresh air. After all, Raphael always said that the simplest things were the ones that made life worth living. She needed to remember that. She then began to allow herself small joys. Over time, she began accepting invitations to go out with friends, to lunch, even for short trips. Of course, the pain of not having Raphael by her side was ever present, but she learned to carry this longing more lightly, without allowing it to paralyze her. She began to realize that starting over didn't mean erasing her husband's memory, but rather learning to live with it in a healthy way. Clara felt grateful that he had been a part of her life, but also understood that she would not be defined by his loss. It was then that a new project emerged. One of the women in the group, Luciana, suggested that Clara start leading workshops on coping and self-esteem for widows. "You've already helped so much here, why not share that with other women?" she suggested enthusiastically. At first, Clara hesitated. She had never imagined she could teach anyone about dealing with grief or rebuilding a life after a loss. But Luciana's words touched her deeply. It was as if she had found a new purpose, something more than just words of support. She began planning the first editions of the workshop, with the idea of helping women rebuild the self-esteem and confidence that are often lost when experiencing a great loss. At first, Clara felt insecure. unsure how she would present herself or if her experiences would be enough to help others. But gradually, she realized that what she had most to offer was her vulnerability, her journey of grief and overcoming. She didn't need to be perfect to help others. After all, she herself was in the process of healing, as were all the women who sought her out. The first workshop was a surprise. The room was packed, the women were anxious, and Clara, with her heart racing, began her talk. She began to share her story, how lost she felt, unsure of how to take the first step. She spoke of the deep sadness that consumed her, and how, little by little, she managed to rebuild herself with the help of others. Clara explained that the healing process is unique to each person, but that there is always a possible path. She also spoke about how small gestures of self-care, such as taking care of oneself, taking a walk, reconnecting with activities that once brought her pleasure, could be small steps in the right direction. What Clara didn't expect was the power of the connection that would form there. The women began to share their own stories. Some cried, others laughed, but all seemed to feel understood and welcomed. Clara realized that by sharing her weaknesses and triumphs, she was creating a supportive space where there was no judgment, only mutual understanding. She never imagined that that step, that simple gesture of starting to help, would completely change her perception of life. Clara realized that, although her pain was something that would never completely disappear, she was now able to use it to do good, to help others find strength when they felt weak. And, most importantly, she learned that starting over didn't mean forgetting, but rather finding new meaning in what remains, in what can still be experienced. And, in this process, she also rediscovered herself. With the success of the workshops, Clara began to realize something even deeper in her journey. The help she offered to other women was not only a healing process for them, but also a healing for herself. Each shared story, each tight hug after a difficult conversation, each moment of mutual understanding seemed to fill a part of the void that still existed within her. It was as if she were, unknowingly, rebuilding a piece of herself with each encounter. The pain she carried didn't completely disappear, but she began to see grief differently. Instead of being an impossible mountain to climb, he became a natural part of her life, something she could learn to live with. Clara could no longer deny that Raphael would always be a part of her, but she no longer saw herself as a woman broken by loss. She now saw herself as someone capable of giving others the strength she once needed. Her pain was transforming into a source of empathy and understanding, and it was this that made her feel more alive, more connected to the world around her. One day, while talking with Marta about the growth of the support group, Clara had a bold idea. What if I could help women who, like me, are in such a difficult place that they can't even imagine starting over? The idea that emerged simply and spontaneously in the conversation became a clearer mission for Clara. She knew that widows needed more than just emotional support. They also needed practical tools to get back on their feet, guidance to regain their autonomy, and the empowerment to know they were capable of rebuilding their lives. Clara then decided to take the next step. She began to think about how to create a more structured program, something that went beyond informal meetings, a course or program that would bring together practical resources for women, including self-awareness activities, future planning, and exercises to help strengthen self. She knew that many women felt invisible after losing their husbands, as if their lives had lost their value, and she wanted to change that. She wanted them to see that, even with the pain of loss, there was still room for dreams, for new beginnings, for rebuilding an entire life. This new project didn't come about overnight. Clara had to study, seek partnerships, and even take courses on empowerment and life coaching. She also enlisted the help of other women in the group, like Luciana and Marta, to build the foundations of the program. What began as a simple idea soon took shape and expanded into something much larger. Clara was creating a program that would offer widows not only emotional comfort but also the tools they needed to regain control of their lives. When the program finally launched, the impact was immediate. Women who had been living in a shadow of sadness and loneliness for months or even years began participating, eager for something to help them change. Clara felt, with each new meeting, that she was fulfilling a mission that went beyond anything she had imagined. She wasn't just helping others. She was helping herself continue to believe that life had so much more to offer. Even without Raphael, the program wasn't just about overcoming loss, but also about creating a new path, with new goals, new passions, and a new identity. Clara knew that many of these women had lost themselves in the routine of caring for home and family, and that the loss of a husband had also erased their sense of purpose. Now, they were rediscovering who they were, beyond their losses. At one of the meetings, Clara was moved to see one of the participants, Tonya, share a major achievement. Tonya had begun studying psychology, something she had always dreamed of but never had the courage to try while she was married. Now, after months in the program, she was halfway through her coursework, feeling empowered and ready for a whole new future. The tears in Tonya's eyes were of gratitude, but also of strength. She was no longer the fragile woman who had arrived at the group lost and without direction. Tonya was becoming the woman she had always wanted to be. This was one of the most meaningful moments for Clara. She knew that her job was not only to help widows overcome the pain of loss, but to help them find themselves again, to remember who they were before they lost themselves in grief. Clara realized that by helping others, she was also helping herself. Each story of overcoming, each new achievement from the participants, reinforced her own belief that life didn't have to be defined solely by loss. Life could also be made of new beginnings. Clara's project, which began as a small support group, was now a movement of transformation. She was helping dozens of women rebuild their lives, realizing that grief wasn't the end, but a painful chapter that, over time, could give way to new possibilities. Clara became not only a mentor but a source of inspiration for all the widows who, like her, had once lost hope that they could ever be happy again. She learned the most important lesson: pain can be devastating, but it can also become a bridge to something deeper and more meaningful. By giving her best to help others, Clara found her best self, and so, the pain that once seemed like the end became a new beginning, a beginning that had no end. With the success of the program and the growth of the movement Clara had created, she began to realize that her role in other women's lives went far beyond offering support. Clara became a reference for those who were lost, unsure of where to begin. Her words, always filled with empathy and understanding, became a beacon of hope for many. She not only helped people cope with grief, but also showed that it was possible to start over, rebuild, and even find new dreams, even after a great loss. Clara's journey, which once seemed like a dark and lonely path, had transformed into a story of strength, resilience, and renewal. What began as a small group of women who gathered to share their experiences and feelings had now expanded into something larger. The movement was growing so much that Clara began receiving invitations to speak at events and conferences on grief and overcoming grief, where she shared her story and the work she was doing. She never imagined that her words, coming from a place of pain, could inspire so many people. But amidst all this growth, Clara never lost sight of what truly mattered: the women she helped transform their lives. Each story of overcoming grief was a reminder that, while the pain of loss never completely disappears, life can still be filled with new meaning. For Clara, the greatest fulfillment was hearing a woman say she had found the courage to start over, to pursue her dreams again, or simply to believe that her life still had much to offer. She began to see that Raphael's loss, which had previously seemed like the end of everything, had been just a chapter in her life. Grief, which had seemed like an endless abyss, gradually became a process of self-discovery and acceptance. Clara learned that pain didn't have to be an enemy. She learned to carry this longing more gently, allowing herself to live alongside it. Instead of running away from the pain, she embraced it and thus created space for a new life, richer in meaning and purpose. Clara's impact on the support group extended beyond the workshops and weekly meetings. Some of the women began actively involved, helping other widows start over. It was as if a cycle of support formed, with each woman helping the other, and so on. What Clara began with a simple desire to help, transformed into a network of women, growing stronger together. They were no longer just widows. They were women who had faced the worst and were now writing their own stories of rebirth. One afternoon, at one of the most moving gatherings Clara organized, one of the participants, Angela, said something that deeply touched Clara's heart. "I came here thinking there was nothing left for me. But over time, I learned to look at life anew, to believe that, despite the pain, I can be happy, I can start over. And it was all thanks to what you taught us, Clara. You showed us that loss doesn't define us, that we are so much more than the pain we carry." Clara couldn't hold back her tears. Hearing this from Angela, and from so many other women she had helped over the months, was confirmation that she was fulfilling her mission. She knew her path to recovery still had its ups and downs, but she also knew that, by helping so many others, she had found a purpose she never imagined possible. Now, Clara looked to the future with a new perspective. She knew that the pain of Raphael's loss would always be a part of her, but no longer overwhelming. Over time, longing had become a space of memories and affection, something that accompanied her, but didn't stop her from living. Clara began to dream of new projects, new ways to support women who were still at the beginning of their journeys. And for her, that was more than enough. She felt that her life had transformed, and that she herself had become a symbol of hope, that it is possible to rise again, even when everything seems lost. Little by little, Clara also began to understand that, however deep the pain had been, what she had achieved throughout this journey was something unique. She had not only helped other women find their way, but she had also found herself in the process. She became a stronger, more capable, more empathetic woman, and most importantly, she realized that life, even after the pain, still had many chapters to be written. She looked back on those early moments when she felt lost and directionless, and smiled, not because the pain had disappeared, but because she had found a way to live alongside it. Life, Clara learned, is not only about complete happiness, but also about overcoming obstacles. And somehow, she knew that her story was still being written, and that what seemed like the end was now becoming a new beginning. And so, Clara continued her journey. For her, life was just beginning again, and now, she knew exactly what it meant to truly live. If you also believe that, even in the greatest adversity, it is possible to start over and find new paths, subscribe to our channel and follow more stories of overcoming like Clara's. Together, we can continue to inspire each other and help each other transform pain into strength. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of these powerful stories.